YouTube. Okay, guys. Yeah. So in today's video, we're going to talk about a homebrew deck which we built um after uh, Kamigawa-block was released in the alchemy in the latest alchemy. So yeah, this is a homebrew deck which we we made it into diamond. The only reason why we haven't probably tried for mythic is because we were too busy with too many things. But I think that if we continued to play much longer, had more time to play, I mean, we would definitely make it to mythic. So yeah, let's go ahead and look at the deck. I have it right here. Okay, so yeah, let's just you. Okay, so this is considered a control deck by design. So it's mainly black, green, splash red. I will talk about the red splash in a bit. But for statistics, so yeah, it's mainly black. We only splash green for some spells. Specifically for two. For Skeletal Swarming and Binding. Note that uh, note the numbers, the quantity. So we wanted to make it such that it wasn't you didn't need to be dependent on any of these two cards for the most part of the game. And yeah, so you might be wondering what the red splash is for. So the red splash is for table Cosmic Imposter. I specifically wanted this card because I've noticed that this card, plenty of players have slept on this card. This is very annoyingly powerful, difficult to remove. You can't get rid of it with Vanishing Verse. You would need specific types of other cards to deal with this, which not a lot of decks carry as well. So yeah, that's an important thing to consider. Okay, so let's go over the list briefly. So actually, the main part or threat of the deck is with the witches here. So obviously, good first turn drop. It unlocks the witch's spellbook spells. So if we go for this, we're actually looking to drop either we want to drop this Cruel Reality or Torment of Skyraps on our opponent. The other options not as good, but let's mention them briefly. Okay, so let's start from number one. So this is maybe a second choice pick, a third choice pick. We've barely needed to use this first because it costs mana to activate, not just one, like 2 mana, so that's very expensive for a sacrifice. Not to mention there's not a lot of creatures to sacrifice anyway. Yeah. Oh, hello, Annie? Yeah. Doing fine. We're doing a deck review right now. So yeah. Okay, let's continue. So next is the Vengeance spell. This is a good board clear, but it's situational. Yeah, it's situational. So you usually don't draft this when you're when your opponent is also a control deck. Usually this is for mono red, mono white, red green wolves, clerics. Yeah, so it works against that. So that's probably a second choice pick. Then yeah, so this is actually another spell that slept on. This artifact actually saves you from the sanguine brushstroke enchantment, which your opponent needs to kill creatures to deal damage to you, right? So this spell will keep you alive much longer, which will allow you to overpower them eventually. And well, it's nice to have 23 lands in your deck, but if you happen to need the witch again and you already have three swamps in play, then definitely this is a good pick when the witch dies. So just something to remember, you need to make sure that you don't shuffle your library, or you don't do an effect which shuffles your library again. So so the witch going on top won't get messed up. Actually, you can actually also use this not just for the witch, but for creatures like the trespasser, the expert, and the connoisseur. Okay, so yeah, let's continue with the list. This familiar isn't really much useful because there are other 3-cost creatures which are better suited. They're better worth spending your mana on. So we never almost pick this. This is also situational. While it's a good card, gives you 1 life every turn as long as it doesn't transform. It's kind of difficult for some decks to deal with, but in our experience of play, we haven't really used this in a lot of games. So I'd say if you see this when the witch dies, probably pick it second. Okay, so for Cauldron Familiar, so this is also a weak pick. 1 for 1, sure, but gaining 1 life, losing 1 life, because your opponent loses 1 life, doesn't really matter unless you have a food token. Okay. But in which case the game would probably already be over by the time. This Black Cat is actually a good pick, depending on the board situation. But for the most part, I would definitely just place this here to annoy your opponent. And this cat combos with other of your spells, such as the dispute. So not only do you cause your opponent to discard a card when you gain a treasure token and draw 2 cards. So it messes up their hand, right? On a time that they don't expect. So that's something good to consider. Also, it also works when you have the cat in play and then you play Blood on Snow, which not only clears the board but takes a card away from your opponent. So there's a lot of things to consider there, right? Okay, so let's continue with number 9. The Broom is actually useful if you have a lot of mana already in play, because this triggers. Let's say you have a Witch in play, then you play this, then you have 3 available mana. So if you have Dispute and then you sack the Witch, you can actually pay 3 more mana. So you have another copy of this. So it's a free blocker. It's an additional blocker. It's food for Meathook Massacre. Deals one more damage to your opponent. Next is the Bloodhunter Bat. This is also another not very popular pick. If you don't have any 4 mana playable card, yeah, sure, go ahead and pick this. Just to stabilize your life total a bit. And you have a flying blocker. But yeah, it's not a primary pick. Okay, another almost unselected pick is the Unwilling Ingredient. Not because of the cheap mana cost, but because of the activation cost of this ability. It really isn't that popular at all. You block, sure, it dies, and then you draw one. But yeah, it's almost not a very popular pick. This is another pick that, well, it's a lesson, yes, but most of the time your board will either be clear or will have just one creature. And this is not one of your preferred picks. I myself have never used this in an actual game, so that's the lowdown on that expanded anatomy. Okay, so this is the spell that we are looking to draft. For most cases, getting this even early when you sack the witch early, I would always advise to, if you think that your opening hand has 3 or 4 lands in hand, yeah, sure, go ahead and draft this, because it simply means it's just a matter of time before you actually draw more lands so you can cast this. Don't be fooled by the 7 casting cost, because the rest of the spells in this deck is actually designed to get you through turn 7. So that is one of the key goals of the Witch threat. So next, this was probably the second best pick other than the Cruel Reality that we just showed, number 13, right? Torment of Scarabs. Yeah, so this is a Cruel Reality light. So your opponent has a 3 life threat instead of 5, and yeah, the choice of negating this is the same, pretty much. But the difference is it's a non-land permanent instead of Cruel Reality that takes a creature. So if you see Cruel Reality in this when the Witch dies, so definitely pick. So let's review the order. So this first, and then this next. And for the last one, so this, okay, so this is a pretty subjective enchantment to draft. If you do, you don't want this if your opponent's deck has just a few creatures, so it's only good for control heavy. So this is probably a 3rd or 4th choice pick when you access the Witch's spellbook. Okay. Next. So next is, well, we have a 1 duress here. So why 1? It's because you only try to do first turn duress when you have it in your opening hand. We don't want to waste card space getting our opponent to discard cards in a 1 per 1 equivalent. So that's why there's only 1 copy of this. If you don't draw a witch, you draw this, then go ahead, you can do first turn. If you draw, if your opening hand has a swamp and you have 1 witch and 1 duress, so you usually still would play a witch first, and then you play the rest in turn 2. Or if you are the second player, if you're basically you base your decision on what your opponent's color is. So if you see a control color such as your opponent drops an island or plains on turn 1, then most likely your first turn is gonna be the rest, because you want to be able to stop a Dry Disruption, a Vanishing Verse, or any quick removal that's probably your opponent has on standby on the second land once it drops, right? So yeah, and then after that, then you can go ahead and play the witch. Playing this first and second turn doesn't really matter much, because it's really just one mana. So and it's 1/2, so there's really not much to worry about. Okay, so let's look at the turn 2 options. So the first one is the acquisitions expert. So this card is actually it's a medium strength card, despite it being 1/2, because the moment it hits the table, it already takes a card away from your opponent. Sure, it may be your opponent's weakest card, since when this ability goes off on the stack, your opponent will probably already have a lot of cards in their hand, since this is turn 2, right? So yeah, you thin your opponent's hand by 1. You have body and board. So first turn, second turn, so you already have 2, and you can block and kill a 2/2 with one of these guys surviving. Okay. Late game, this is also good. If you needed to get rid of a card in your opponent's hand, you could do so with, when you combo it off, Blood on the Snow, or you do Soul Transfer with a artifact in play. Okay, so that's the deal for this. So obviously, we will need to draw cards faster, to cycle through your life faster. So that is what Dispute is for. It's basically a Dispute and Painful Bond. So the reason why we split them into 2 is because we don't want full dependency on Dispute. There is no specific need to generate too many treasure tokens immediately. So we want a balance between that and instant speed, draw 2 cards. So let's talk about Painful Bond a little more. So this is one of the newest card draw for black, and it's actually pretty good, despite the disadvantage of losing life when you draw a card that has 3 cost or more, right? The mere fact that it's instant speed is already good, because you can actually bluff. You can bluff into having a removal or something, or making your opponent think twice about casting a creature that needs to die. Or basically the other play about this is when you have two mana on board and you don't have a land in your hand, you can just wait until the end of your opponent's turn before throwing this. So when you cast this, you always have the chance of getting a land after 2 draws, right? So, and then your third draw when it's your turn. So you have 3 chances to get a land. So to make sure that your mana base is stabilized, without much work. Okay, then next, so we have noticed that we only have 1 copy of Plunder. So you might ask, why only 1 copy? This is actually good early game and probably mid game. However, if you try playing this later in the game, by the time that happens, your opponent probably doesn't have anything in their hand anyway. So there's really no excitement in getting your opponent to to cast to discard nothing and then to get a card from your opponent's deck. So this is why there's only one copy of it. We actually tried placing multiple copies in it, and it wasn't really much of an effective game. So yeah, we settled with one. So that's pretty good, as I feel. Okay. Um. So next is let's talk about the removal spells next. So the first is obviously Infernal Grasp. So this is basically one of the workhorses of removals for black for the Kamigawa and Midnight Hunt block. So yeah, the only drawback is of course you lose 2 life, but that's really not much of an issue since it's instant and there's no constraints about what creature you can't kill. And this is why we have 3 of those in the deck. And then, so this is your quick removal turn 2. So moving on the next turn, so you have 1 copy of Soul Transfer. So this is pretty much a 50-50 because you want to cast this immediately. You want to delay this, I mean. You only want to do this after you cast an enchantment or enchantment and an artifact, which you can get with a Dispute, which you can get with a Meathook, or you can get with the Binding. So you have, and Swarming too. So you have three options of enchant to wait on before using this. But if you absolutely need to remove a creature immediately on turn 3, so this is an option. Next is of course the standard Meathook Massacre. Really useful removal for black. It's the most used, I think, for in the recent 2 seasons. So kills everything, gives everything minus. So this means that it goes through indestructible creatures. So Toski can survive. Anything that is marked as indestructible will still die because minus X means the creature already dies. So it's not. It's being indestructible is usually from damage, from combat damage and whatnot, or from a source. So this gets through all of that, clears the board. Not only that, the other hidden benefit of this is if your creatures die, your opponent loses life, and when you kill your opponent's creatures, you gain life. So a good strategy is to set this up and then start killing your opponent's creatures with a second copy of this, a Binding, or Invoke Despair, or Blood on the Snow. So there's plenty of future options to set up, and of course you can always cast a second copy of this. Then you make sure that you select the one that just came into play. So that's really important to consider. Okay, so let's move on to the list for the 3 cast. So next up is Go Black. So there is a specific reason why we tech 2 of these. On turn 2, say we cast this, right? Or we do first turn to this and then this. Actually, even just this alone. When we do this third turn, our opponent is mentally conditioned that you're gonna lose all your cards soon because I already gave you a -2 for my -1, and your graveyard is gonna disappear as well. So this is an important consideration, most especially if your opponent is control. If your opponent is using a archive deck or blue or a different variant of blue white, so yeah, this is very important to cast. Uh, so it's not always good on turn two, on turn three. Sometimes you want to do this later when your opponent has fewer cards in their hand, and sometimes you also need to check if your opponent is pulling off some stunt like doing see the future, as the spell from blue which actually returns cards from the graveyard back to their library. So you would wanna make sure that none of that happens again. So if you don't want to opt for in-hand removal, you can also go in for on the board 2-card removal. This is why this card is here. The Trespasser is actually really good for 2 reasons. The first is if you have a spell or a creature that you need out of the graveyard, yeah, for sure, this will take care of it. Imagine your opponent discarded something with the expert, and it's a creature. Then third turn, this follows up, so you already gain 1 life just from by playing this, right? So, second part is this card takes 2 cards to get rid of. Why? Because of the ward ability. So you will, if I was a black opponent and this was on the table and I needed to get rid of it, so I needed to use 1 copy of Infernal Grasp and I need to discard a card. So you've already costed your opponent 2 cards by just dealing with this 1 threat on the board. Not to mention it's a fat threat. 3/3 there isn't something to laugh at. You're gonna make sure that this is gonna be dealt with. So these are your turn 3 options. So Soul Transfer, yeah, we'll talk about that a little later. We'll move on first to the 4 turn options. So this is actually one of the really popular cards this format, this recent constructed. So this is also an auto discard. The moment it hits the table, it take out your opponent's most expensive spell without any decision making whatsoever. So if your opponent is hiding something like a 5th turn Planeswalker or a removal that's expensive, like Farewell or Blood in the Snow or any expensive creature, you can already get rid of it as early as turn 4. So that's something that's really good. And it is Death Touch and you produce a token. So that means that you will definitely take out a creature when this hits the table. And you are also going to get gas for Soul Transfer. Remember the ability. You can actually return something to your hand and exile a creature if you have an artifact. So one of the sources of the artifact is here and here. Another one, as I mentioned a while ago, is the oven from the witch. So when this hits the table, you also have something to give you life, and you have 1 artifact to play, which your opponent will almost never deal with, since it just gives you life. Why not, right? Okay, so let's move on to the binding. So I think a lot of players don't really consider this card to be a really strong card, but I think that this card takes care of the removal that you might lack if you just went with mono black. Because if there's anything, this deck doesn't have a lot of ways of dealing with enchantments. Specifically, it's really around turn 5 by means of Invoke Despair, and you only get to get rid of an enchantment that they choose. You cannot choose the enchantment here. If your opponent has several enchantments, then they'll just play around it. So which is why this is here. So this is of course your standard removal. Um, Once this hits the battlefield, ability goes on stack for the first time this hits the table, and then it gets you a forest. It doesn't matter if it's tapped, as long as you'll have more lands in the next turn. That's fine. And then it gives your the third one isn't really that much useful, but it's nice to have anyway. Okay, so let's move on to the turn 5 options. So next you have Lolth, Spider Queen. So this is of course we were thinking about putting 3 of these, but when I realized that we already had this, so we might as well splash a green threat, right? So this is why we switched one up to Swarming, because the thing is, this is not a very expected card. People are expecting Lolth for sure. Good. You have Planeswalker body plus the moment it hits the table, you immediately have 2 blockers. And if you have a creature in play already, and then you execute 2 blockers, so you already have enough to get Lolth's ability active again for another turn. So that's very good to consider. Then of course, if you think that you need to gain on card advantage, then you can just pop 1 life and get a card instead. So 5 mana for that is of course good. Then there is Invoke Despair. So you might be wondering, why is there only 1 copy of this? It's really because, for 2 reasons. First, this is too expensive to cast. Second is because it's as you can look at the cost closely, it's 4 black, right? So this means that you will need at least 4 black sources. But if you look at our mana base, there is a chance we will have a fourth turn forest to play this. So this means that we already are making this risky. This might end up as a dead card in your hand, which is why we only have 1. Not to mention, we also prefer casting this late in the game when you have more mana sources, which is why we only have 1 copy of this. While I also understand that it's quite powerful, it's too expensive. And it's very restrictive in its casting cost. Then we have Swarming. So as I mentioned a while ago, this enchantment is not expected here, because you played mono black for the first 4 turns and your opponent's thinking, oh okay, yeah sure, this guy's probably gonna just splash it for binding. But this, you never expect this. When this hits the table, your opponent's gonna it's like an auto win condition, because there's no way you can stop this. The only way you could stop this is if you have 2 big creatures, which your opponent most likely won't have, because you've already been killing them already. Not to mention, if you clear the table during your turn, you're gonna get 2 skeletons immediately, which your opponent has to deal with again, turn after turn. So this is an important card. If you're wondering why there's only 1, again, we needed to make sure that we don't depend on it to win, basically. So you might ask, okay, before that, let's talk about the turn 6 options. So Blood in the Snow obviously needs snow lands, so which is why our basic mana base is composed of basic snow covered lands. in addition to several choice lands to filter out the color which we need for the rest of the spells in the deck. We need to put this here for two reasons. Sometimes the effect from some of these spells need to be done a second time, specifically for the Connoisseur, for the Expert, and for the Witch. So the synergy of the cards work well with this spell. So this is important to consider. You can also use this to take out an opponent's Planeswalker if they've cleared yours out and you want to bring yours back. So it's a utility card, and the best part is it's only 2 black and 4, so it means that you can have any number of non-black mana. So you don't necessarily have to wait for X snow-covered lands to be in play. It depends on the situation, which is why you can have, let's say, four non-snow lands producing mana, and then 2 black. So you can bring back at least this or this. So there is always still some sort of value left after you clear the board, or you get rid of Planeswalker. So that's very important to consider, which is why we made sure that there is at least a couple of these in play. Oh, I also forgot to mention that this is also comboing with this. So if you have 3 snow-covered lands, play that. And then this goes back, and then the creatures you just killed, this guy will eat when it goes back into play. So it's really good, right? So you can see the synergy there of the cards. Okay, so now the thing that I wanted to talk about the most about what's hidden in this deck is turn 7. So turn 7 is from this Valki. So this is the reason why this deck made it to Diamond, is because this card actually has hit the table, and it's like it's almost an auto win condition, because it's very difficult to get rid of, since it's a multicolored planeswalker. So it goes around Vanishing Verse. It's usually you would need that Judgment spell from white, which removes it. But again, your opponents will probably have already no cards in their hand because of the amount of spells that are surrounding it. So yeah, not to mention, you can also use this planeswalker to steal your opponent's creatures or steal an artifact. So if your opponent drops a Tergrid's Lantern, a Blood Artist via Sanguine Brushstroke, you can just you can exile their artist, and then their combo gets lost. Or you can exile the Oni Anvil, the red-black artifact that produces more artifact tokens. So it's really good, right? As long as you get to protect it. So the key point here is before you play this spell, turn 7 at the earliest, or turn 6 if you have a treasure token, is that you make sure that you have something to block it from being attacked, because most likely you're going to have your mana tap, and if you do something such as activate its ability, so you need something to protect it from being attacked. So you have at least spiders in play from Lolth, or the Trespasser, or a Witch, or an Expert blocking. Okay, so this is a very important card to consider when you are going to cast it. So for our support, other support features of the deck include the Hive, the Eye Tyrant. So this is definitely one of your sleeper support. You almost don't use this to attack, since spending 4 mana and a land to attack is pretty much an inefficient use of mana. So you don't wanna do it, but you sometimes have to. In the event that your opponent also has a board clear and there's no creatures and you need to nuke your opponent's graveyard card at a time. So this is why this is here. And then you also have your own defense via Field of Ruin. So this gets rid of your opponent's Tyrant, your opponent's Lair of the Hydra, your opponent's Cave of the Frost Dragon. So yeah, if it's an if situation, or you could really just take out your opponent's dual dual land if you think that a certain land is causing you will deny your opponent access to spells they need to cast of a certain color. So yeah, it's good to have that there. So yeah, that's pretty much the deck. So so the thing is the best part. So if you look at the statistics, it's really low, relatively low cost. So this is a sign of good, good curve, um, and you have a lot of options. You don't have a very expensive deck, and the ratio for black to green is pretty good. So you almost have very little chance of mana screw. So yeah, that's basically the deck. Sideboard, okay. So for sideboard, if you want to go through on raise to 2, so there we have the following sideboards for this. So the first is another copy of Duress. This we also have environmental sciences, fumes, and breach. So you might be wondering where does it come from, or how are we able to extract these. So it's possible to if by some chance you manage to exile your opponent's Eye Twitch via an early Valki, if you play this turn to and you capture a spell, so you can morph into the Eye Twitch and get a copy. So that's one way of accessing that. Other than that, the other spells here are you swap in depending on your opponent's build. So Cosmos Elixir, this was strengthened in Alchemy, so gives you more life, allows you to scry. So that's good. You also get to draw a card if your total is higher. So this is something that's good against mono white. Mono red probably, but I don't think I've seen a lot of mono red recently. So yeah, this is something you might want to think about. Introduction to Annihilation. So this is well, not a very popular sorcery lesson, but it's here for the sake of filling the space. Obviously, Mascot Exhibition is obviously a staple pick, since you want to make sure that you have enough blockers. But we didn't necessarily have to use this. Then of course, yeah. So it's basically 2 more copies of the rest, Return to Nature, and Toski. These 2 are really for cards for decks like Naya Jiki, the green white enchant, which is heavily reliant on enchants, right? Like the Rune Knight, and there's this creature that's 2/2 and is enchantment and a creature at the same time. So yeah, this is really just for if your opponent is counter heavy, then you can just drop this to your opponent, so they can deal with it. They'll spend resources trying to deal with it, but eventually it'll make its way to the board anyway. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for the deck review. If you have any questions or something, post it in the comments so we can evaluate it in another video and see how we're doing. So yeah, with that, oh yeah, I just forgot to show you. Yeah, we did make it to diamond this season. So the thing is, as I mentioned earlier in the video, we didn't have much time to play for this season, but I think if we kept grinding further, we'd definitely pushed it through Mythic. But yeah, I think we'll have more time to play next next season. So, but we'll see how it goes. I'm excited for Capenna to come out, so we'll find out what happens in the next few days. So yeah, with that, so I guess that's it for this deck review. We'll hope to see you again in the next video. So until then, keep playing and have fun with Magic together.